Julie, could you go and do a sheepdog turn on anyone who's in the building who hasn't made their way up here yet? Broadcasting, we are quorate, so I am going to make a start. Welcome to this morning's planning committee. It's the last day of September and properly autumn. And we are back in this room, which is a relief. As you know, at the last meeting, we weren't sure which room we were going to be in. Just a few remarks. This is a quasi-judicial meeting. No decisions are made in advance of the meeting. The members of the committee sit here as representatives of the whole council rather than as ward councillors. And as the Lord Mayor always reminds us at full council, we do not enjoy parliamentary privilege during these meetings, so you do need to think carefully about your words. We do have speakers on two of our items this morning, and when we get to those items, we'll go through the process. People who've registered to speak are the only people who can speak on those items. Okay, turning to the agenda then, the notice of recording and webcast. This meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's meeting YouTube site. I'm not going to attempt the string of letters and numbers, but if you Google BCC meetings on the YouTube site, then you will get to the right place. Members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items, of which I do not expect to have any today. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. That's the standard declarations of interest paragraph that applies to all BCC meetings. In addition, you may see or hear members withdraw from a particular item because they've previously expressed a view on that site or that particular application. And again, that will be recorded in the minutes. I have apologies from Councillor Booth, Councillor Griffiths, Councillor Johnson-White, as she is now, and we will congratulate her on her marriage when she returns to us. I also have apologies from Councillor Straker-Wells. And I think everybody else is present. So I can move on to item 4, which is Chair's announcements. And as I said, we're now thoroughly into autumn, and our next meetings will be the 14th and 28th of October and the 11th of November. Minutes, we have the minutes of the 2nd of September. Can we agree those as a correct record? And I have agreed to move the Civico report up to this point on the agenda. It appears at item 10. This is the annual performance overview for Civico, who do our building control function for Birmingham City Council. So rather than have them sit through the applications, I've agreed to take the report here. It has been circulated. Would you like to introduce yourselves? I don't have your names on my list, so if you can say who you are.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Stephen Hewitt. I'm the Statutory Functions Officer, Birmingham City Council.
Chair, I'm Jed Cooper, Associate Director of Civico Building Services.
So we've had the report. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Just let you know the high level performance maintained by Civico the financial year 2021. Noted.
And you mentioned that you're the statutory officer. Does that mean the buck stops with you if anything goes wrong, or is there anything that sits with the committee if there's a problem.
Starts with ID service, the legal statutory functional officer, the delegation of human clerks, interim director.
Right, so there's nothing other than what's in the report that as a committee we need to be concerned about. Anyone got any questions? Gareth?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask regarding the dangerous structures response times, because I can see that the target was 100%, which was achieved. But in terms of it's all well and good attending a dangerous structure, what's actually done to fix it and make sure it's actually fully addressed? Because certainly my experience during the pandemic with the Civico cases is that officers are very quick to go out and have a look, but not actually fix the problems. And my concern is that if we've got dangerous structures, I would be more interested in them sorted rather than just simply showing up and having a look at them. So can we have some future performance indicators of those dangerous structures where officers attend, they're actually resolved? And that should be for all categories, not just category A.
Yeah, it absolutely. We'll include that in the next report. I mean, there are dangerous structures and we prioritise those dangerous structures. If a dangerous structure needs immediate action, then we've got facilities available to sort out and make this situation safe. Obviously, it's the people who own the building or the structure that are responsible for making it safe, and we wouldn't want to commit. We don't want to commit resources, anybody's resources, when the owner of the building or structure is perfectly capable of sorting out, or it may well be within an insurance company that will work with them on their behalf to try and get resolved the matter. We would only take action in circumstances where there's an immediate danger and where the people who own the building or structure either can't or refuse to make the situation safe. But there's a whole load of other dangerous structures which don't fall into that category, which we would call potentially dangerous. And to take action, the correct process is to go through the courts and get the court to instruct the who own the structure to make it safe. And that is our preferred option. So if it's not an immediate danger, it may look like we're kind of not doing a lot, but in the background we will be writing to people and getting ownership details, and we've got a process where we can do that. And obviously, following that process, we can recover all our costs as well. So it's about risk, obviously, because we do go out there straight away. And but sometimes we may judge that the risk isn't as dangerous, isn't actually as dangerous as it looks. So if there's any kind of particular issue about that, people contact us and they're not shy of doing that, and we respond to them very quickly. And we'll go out again and again to relook and reassess the structure. But we'll include those details in the report in the future. We've been asked to.
Do you want to follow that up, Councillor Moore?
Well, I don't want to get bogged down in a particular case I've got, because I've got some beef with the Civico at the moment, so I don't intend to bore the meeting with that. But I'm just particularly concerned that the Civico are very quick at attending and they're not doing anything about the safety concerns that residents have reported.
Should Councillor Moore get in touch with you and have that conversation? Okay. Certainly, my local experience has been on dangerous working rather than dangerous structures, and the sites on both occasions have been closed down very quickly and not allowed to reopen until the appropriate measures have taken place. Anybody else want to ask anything? I'm not seeing anyone. So thank you very much. We have fulfilled our function in looking at your report again this year. And you're always welcome to come back if there's something else that you want to bring up in the meantime. Thank you. So we do move on now to planning applications. We do these on a geographical basis. Today, our only two new applications are both from the South area, and we do have speakers on both of them. So speakers are allowed 3 minutes in total in objection and 3 minutes in total in support. So if there's more than one person wishing to speak, they have to share that time. And our Assistant Director, Sean Hannaby, will manage that process when we get to it. So item 6 today is units 5 to 9 on the Selly Oak Industrial Estate on Elliot Road in Selly Oak, which is not in my ward anymore. So we will take updates, speakers, response to speakers from our officer, and then open it to members. And I should say at this point, before I call on Louise for the update, that Mr. Toon, who is objecting on this item, is known to me because we've worked together on issues in my ward, but that won't affect my decision on this item. Councillor Moore.
Chair, just to declare, I know Mr. Toon as well, but not discuss the application.
Thank you. Louise, updates.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 3 updates on this report. First is just to note for the public record that the applicant submitted a letter or email that was circulated to all members in support of their application. There's nothing within that letter that requires any further discussion at the moment. It's all covered within the report, just for the record. We've had 1 additional letter of support, which has been signed by 4 local businesses. And I'll just briefly summarise what they have said. They say they are delighted to see that the City Council has recommended approval to the Watkin Jones planning application, student accommodation. Students are an important part of the community. They make the area a safe and vibrant place to live and work. They do not see students as a burden, but as an opportunity to grow as a business. During the pandemic, a lack of students in Selly Oak had a major impact on our businesses. We want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. More students could also provide opportunities for employment within Selly Oak. If we are able to get more people through the door, it may provide us with a chance to employ more staff. Please approve the application. And then we've had an additional objection, actually from the speaker that you'll hear just shortly, sent in to us, setting out their strong objections to the proposal. Most of the issues raised are covered within the report, but just a couple of issues I wanted to highlight because they are new issues that aren't specifically covered. One of them relates to the proposal not being exempt or being exempt from council tax, and therefore there's no specific financial gain for the city from the student accommodation. Just to remind members that in common with all other student accommodation, the application would be subject to payment for SIL. On this application, that would be in the order of £810,000. So there is that financial contribution there. And the second point, within the email, there was a link to an article within the press relating to a proposal for the city to use some surplus accommodation at Perry Bar to house homeless persons. That is a current planning application, so I'm not intending to make any comments on that specifically, but I don't think that it will be a surprise that there is surplus accommodation in Perry Bar, because obviously the closing of BCU and the moving of most of those premises and students away from Perry Bar is going to release that accommodation that had been used in the past. It wouldn't impact on the need for student accommodation in Selly Oak, which is obviously what's under consideration before members today. Those are the updates, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, I'll hand over to you then to introduce our speakers and time them.
Mr. Toon, you have 3 minutes. I'll jump in 15 seconds just before the end, just to allow you to wind up, but start whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Barry Toon. I represent the Community Partnership Selly Oak in objecting to this proposal for 523 beds of student accommodation in Selly Oak. The local community strenuously object to this development because of the serious implications it has. This includes a petition and 75 letters of objection, including the MP, local councillors and local residents groups. There are no homeless students in Birmingham. This is demonstrated by the Student Council's own student needs survey. This development is targeted purely at achieving the Class M 100% council tax exemption. It will provide no mixed-use housing for single people other than students. Thus, the city will receive no housing gain from its build. It is claimed that there will be a reduction in demand for HMOs as people will move into the new development. Analysis of local planning applications shows that this is an unfounded assumption. Local planning applications for HMOs have increased despite the growth in PBSA build in the area. Selyoak Village, to the west of the railway line, is not like Bournebrook. It is reasonably well balanced, but is under threat of becoming unbalanced. Based on the 2011 census and the 2020 council tax exemptions, we estimate the current student population at 37%. The Elliott Road development will take that to 42%, clearly too high to sustain a balanced community. BDP TP 27 calls for balanced communities, while BDP policy GA9 seeks to address the problems faced by residential areas like Selyoak and Bournebrook, protect the balance of local communities. From recent discussions with the University of Birmingham, we have also been informed that the new first-year intake was oversubscribed by 715. However, the university accommodation still has 100 empty rooms. We also know the city has just announced it will be using a surplus 414-bed student hall of residence as a homeless hostel. Planning policy TP33 says there should be a demonstrated need for PBSA and that there will not be an unacceptable impact on the local neighbourhood and residential amenity. On this evidence, can it be argued that there is a need for more student accommodation and it will have an acceptable impact on the neighbourhood? Other policies not complied with are BDP 20 in terms of employment land and the overlooking of neighbours SPD, which fails the 5 metre per storey test by 25%.
15 seconds.
Additionally, with no parking, it fails the city car parking SPD of 1 space and 5 beds. Residence parking scheme is being introduced in Elliott Road, where there is already a recognised shortage. Sense Charity, based adjacent to the proposal, provides dozens of spaces to cope with a similar use. Thus, we request this application to be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. We've got Eleanor Grady, the agent. Thank you. Likewise, you have 3 minutes and I'll jump in for you. So whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Eleanor Grady. I'm the Head of Development Planning for Arcadis. I'm accompanied by Ian Smith, Planning Director at Watkin Jones. I'm speaking in support of Watkin Jones' latest proposal in our city. They have a proven track record of high quality developments, including the old fire station, which won numerous awards, including Rix's Innovation Through Design Award. We've been working collaboratively with council officers for over 2 years now, resulting in a scheme that will contribute to meeting the council's own identified need of circa 13 student bed spaces. The development has been designed with the safety and well-being of students in mind, many of whom will be coming to our city for the first time moving away from their family home. The development provides a positive living experience and have a 24-hour staff presence on site, being managed by Fresh, who are regularly awarded Operator of the Year. Students would be within a 5-minute walk to Selyoak Station and a 20-minute walk to the heart of the University of Birmingham. One of the benefits of the scheme is its active frontage to the canal, and we have worked with the Canal and Rivers Trust to agree a number of enhancements that would be installed by Watkin Jones, including lighting and signage to the towpath, contributing to the city's desire to make the towpath an enjoyable and safe amenity and commuting space. There will also be a significant contribution to improvements of Selyoak Park for the benefit of all. As part of the design evolution, listening to comments by officers, we brought local award-winning architect Ben Howard Associates on board, and we now have a scheme significantly reducing density and supportive of officers, which would comprise successful placemaking and well-designed sustainable development on brownfield land in compliance with quality. The scheme will achieve BREEAM excellence and biodiversity again. The applicant continues to work collaboratively with Revolution Gymnastics to help them find suitable premises to secure their long-term future. The applicant has put significant effort into engagement, not just with councillors and local groups, but with harder-to-reach groups, resulting in 230 letters of support, including petition signatures, outweighing those received in objection. Those letters of support include Revolution Gymnastics and Zodiac, the current occupiers of the site, the Chamber of Commerce, and local residents and businesses. There are no objections from council departments or statutory consultees. We expect circa 3,000 construction-based jobs, including apprenticeships, and 10 full-time equivalent operational jobs, a net increase in jobs. I would like to finish by saying heartfelt thank yous to council officers, especially Andrew, Harvey, and Simon and Louise, for working with us on this for all this time, and hope our efforts are rewarded with a grant of permission today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Louise, if you'd like to answer the points raised in both those contributions.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of the speakers this morning. So just picking up on some of the issues that were raised, particularly from the objector, and obviously there were a couple of points there that I'd already covered within my update, so I won't repeat those. Just starting with the issue of need for student accommodation, as members know, that's been debated at length on a variety of applications, most notably on the Triangle site and more recently at the Dogpool Lane site in Sturchley. The city, as you know, has accepted the need argument on both of those applications and other applications for student accommodation across the city. And it hasn't been used as a reason for refusal. And I think that's particularly important to note on the Triangle site, which is the subject of an appeal, and that public inquiry starts next month. But the clear advice from our barrister at the time was that the issue of need had been dealt with and the application satisfied policy TP 33. We're still in the same situation, and in terms of the evidence submitted by the applicant and our own evidence, we are satisfied that there still is that need for student accommodation. Just in terms of the updated paper that came before you, that was earlier in the year. That looked at the predicted growth, particularly around University of Birmingham and BCU, because that's the catchment that we're looking at in Selly Oak. And again, that reinforced that there was a need. That paper also had a look, and so did the application at Dogpool Lane, into the occupancy levels, because that had been something that was raised by a number of objectors. It looked at the occupancy levels before COVID, and in terms of the accommodation within Selly Oak, the purpose-built student accommodation, that was nearly 100% in all of those accommodations. Obviously, that dropped during COVID, but all indications from the universities that we're speaking to, and particularly the providers of purpose-built student accommodation, is that those occupancy levels are expected to get back up to those previous levels, whether that is from domestic students or from overseas students. And clearly, Watkin Jones, who are the applicants this morning, have got that track record of providing student accommodation, not just in the city, but across the whole of the country. They obviously believe that they want to invest in this site, significant investment, and they wouldn't want to be building that if they don't think that the premises are going to be full. So I think that in terms of need and the tests within policy TP 33, that has been satisfied. A comment about the balanced community obviously is a very valid concern, and there was mention about a certain percentage of students in relation to the wider community. We obviously as a city don't have a specific set target within our policy. We don't have a percentage. What we have within policy TP 33 is a more general comment which says that proposals should not have an unacceptable impact on the local neighbourhood and residential amenity, which is more of a general test and a more general approach. This is something, again, that we debated on the Triangle site and talked through with our barrister, and he was quite clear that we needed to have robust evidence that demonstrated that there was an adverse impact, or that there would be an adverse impact caused by more student accommodation, and that if there was, that would outweigh all of the other positives that were brought forward by the scheme. We think in this particular case that the scheme is acceptable, has a number of positives in terms of the regeneration of that site, and that the impact would not be so adverse that we would recommend refusal. Comment about the scale of the proposal and the relationship with the existing dwellings, particularly on Elliott Road. That's been looked at very carefully. The scheme has evolved and has been revised fairly significantly from when it was first submitted. The scale of the proposal, particularly on that frontage on Elliott Road, has been brought down to better reflect that scale and any impact. And there are some images at the beginning of the report that members can have a look at, and we think that they will fit in well with existing terrace properties. During the application process, the site was actually expanded to take in more land, which goes right up to the canal, so that it's more of a comprehensive development rather than a piecemeal one. And that brought up an opportunity to reduce some of the scale of the development and also to break up some of the blocks. It gave an opportunity to look at the massing and also the creation of a very large communal area, a courtyard for the students within the development, which we think was very positive. The scale does increase as it moves away from the existing residential, so there's greater scale towards the canal, but that doesn't have any impact on existing residential. So I think it's an acceptable scheme. We are very happy with the way that the scheme and the design has evolved, and there's been close consultation with our city design advisors who are very comfortable with that, and it's a very efficient use of this brownfield site. I'm going to ask my colleague in transportation just to comment on the issue of the car parking, but just to mention to members within the recommendation on the section 106, the first subsection of that is the requirement for a survey to be done after occupation, 6 monthly parking surveys, and then a secure £40,000 to deal with any mitigation works that might arise from that. But my colleague wants to comment in any more detail just about the car parking. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, the development is policy compliant for the car parking guidelines. That indicates that the maximum bedroom provision on site of 6 parking spaces. But the quantum realises that that is compliant with the guidelines. It's also a mechanism for enabling disability parking to be managed, and also turn time, drop-off and departure also managed. It should also be brought in line with the current with evidence base that there is likely to be more traffic associated with space and rural area, but at the moment that may not be fully occupied. Certainly there is a database with evidence traffic movements that could be achieved by improving space. In terms of cycling parking, again, there's a policy compliance with the internal provision, and there is also a framework travel plan which will lead into the travel plan shift to ensure that that feeds into the survey about potential on-street parking pressures that may occur if and that was looked at with any other non-development surveys within the area.
Thank you. Are you finished, Louise?
Yes, thank you.
So I can open this up to members. Anyone wish to speak on this one? Councillor Stanford.
Thank you very much, Chair. There are quite a few things I really like about this this application. Firstly, the fact that it's utilising brownfield land, that is always preferable to the alternative. I enjoyed the sloping roof and the fact that the roadside frontage is a terrace effect with red brick, which is in keeping with the general architecture of the area. I'm happy with the increasing height as we head toward the canal's frontage. And in particular, I'm really liking the ground floor glass front that leads onto the canal. One thing which I would highlight, however, is that it's fantastic to be bringing this area of the canal back into use, and for me, this is the biggest asset and attraction of this new block, is the use of the canal, the enhancement to the towpath and the lighting. What I would highlight is that just across the Bristol Road Bridge, there's a major canal development work being done by the Lyttleton Canal Trust, a new winding hole at the Selly Sainsbury's, which, as we all know. What I would highlight is that if we're looking at enhancing the canals around this area, particularly as the students are going to be using this canal to get into university, into the city centre and so on, I think that the S1 and 6 should have greater focus on the enhancement of the canals in the area, given that the winding hole will be 100 metres, 200 metres from this site. I think that would be an area that should be considered as a greater contribution from the S1 and 6. I'm very happy with the officer's report and the recommendation to approve this proposal. Having spent some time as a student in Selly, there are a great many fairly ugly blocks, if I can call them that, and this one is fairly aesthetically pleasing. I'm not at all convinced by the objections that have been put forward by both councillors and local MP, which sadly I think fall fairly comfortably into the bracket of NIMBYism on this road. So I would hope that I'll certainly be voting myself in favour of this application on the recommendations from the officers. I hope that our colleagues on this committee will consider the application rather than the objections of their colleagues outside of the committee.
Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Chair. I do think this is one of the better designs in terms of student accommodation that's come before us, so especially recently. So I do like the design of it, but I remain concerned about the issue of need. And I know Louise touched on it, we've debated it multiple times, but I'm going to raise it again because I remain not convinced that there is such a huge demand for purpose-built student accommodation, as has been alluded to. Our needs assessment has suggested that there is sufficient accommodation in Birmingham already to house students, but we keep being told we need more purpose-built student accommodation, and there's been no evidence to suggest as to why it has to be purpose-built as opposed to other forms of student accommodation. I do share a lot of the concerns raised by Mr. Toon on that. So I've read through the report, I've read through the information that the applicant has suggested, and it doesn't answer those questions. It says there's a need for purpose-built accommodation, but doesn't evidence why there is a need, other than just saying student numbers will increase, students are going to continue to go to university. Of course they are, but we're not hearing from students exactly what they want, and I'll be particularly interested to know, perhaps for future applications, to hear back from the actual people who are going to be needing student accommodation, rather than just the developers who, perhaps not surprisingly, suggest that there is a need for what they're providing. I think we also have to bear in mind that this application impacts on employment land and the loss of a gymnasium, both of which are protected within the development plan. So on that balance, I disagree with my colleague in that I don't believe the benefits of this scheme outweigh those policy considerations on the basis that there is no need for this application, and therefore I shan't be supporting it.
Councillor Suleiman.
Thank you. While I agree that the aesthetics of the building are probably better than some that we see around the city, I think I'd just like to comment that I think with these kind of purpose-built accommodation, it's very much about how they manage. That has an impact on the wider area. But what my question is, what, if any, impact will our decision today have on the upcoming appeal for Triangle site?
Anybody else want to come in? Can I unmute the impact on the appeal on the Triangle site, whether there's anything that would be drawn from our decision? Unusually, I'm going to add a question myself, which is on condition 18, about the replacement facility. If you can just expand on that a little, so that the committee are clear what that actually means. You've mentioned a Grampian condition in the report. You can just have some clarification on that. I'm not seeing anybody else, so if you can pick those points up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you to members' questions. Just the first issue about the canal and obviously the works for the obviously, as you noted, within the suggested part of the section 106, we are looking for the applicant to improve the lighting along part of the canal and also do some wayfinding signage. But the details of that will come out in the wording of the section 106, and we haven't yet got to a point where we decided with the applicants the extent of those works. So certainly we can look at how that links into the works that are happening at the Lyttleton. Just to note that the Sainsbury's application that was approved, the section 106 was negotiated on that. Directed money towards that reinstatement of London Canal, so there is already that financial investment in there. But certainly, yes, when we're looking at the detail in the section 106, we can look at the extent of those works. Just in terms of the issue of need, obviously not wanting to repeat what I've already said and what we've said on numerous occasions, but just looking back at the report that came to members earlier in the year, and just a section in there, because there was an acknowledgement that at the moment students have got accommodation, whether that's in purpose-built student accommodation, whether it's in HMOs or at home. So the report said this suggests that any new purpose-built student accommodation would either be to serve a growth in the student numbers, which we know is going to happen, rectify a mismatch in the type of accommodation that's available, respond to changing student preferences, or replace existing purpose-built student accommodation. So that was setting out the scenarios in terms of where that demand and need is likely to come from. Just in terms of the appeal, there's no direct impact in terms of the triangle appeal. That application was refused in terms of the view from committee that the scale and the density was unacceptable. So that will be the main focus of the debate at the inquiry. However, that doesn't stop other issues being raised, and there will be third parties taking an active part within that inquiry, and they will have the opportunity to raise whatever issues they want, and that may include the question of need. It may also include the question of impact on residential amenity and the character. So that will be debated, but the determination this morning won't have any direct impact on the decision that an inspector would make in respect to that application. Chair, you just raised clarification in terms of condition 18. So this revolves around finding replacement facilities for the existing Revolution gym that's on the site. Obviously, it's very, very important that we get that secured. And it's part of the reason why the application has been in for such a significant time, because we have been discussing with the applicant, with the operators of the gym, and also critically with Sport England, because they did have a holding objection on the application. They weren't prepared to remove that objection unless we had a condition on that secured the future of it. So effectively what that means is that no development can take place on the site until we have agreed a replacement facility, and that needs to be located and secured to a specification that will be agreed with the operators. So that gives us that security and certainty, and obviously allowed then Sport England to remove their statutory objection from the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
That was the points raised by members.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Stanford wanting to come back.
But Chair, I realise I probably should have turned into the committee member offered about how to get my votes to that now.
Yes. I'm going to allow you to continue in the room and to vote, because we haven't got a proposal before us that directly funds that activity. Tandy, am I okay on that? Okay. Try and get that in a bit earlier in the debate in future. Okay then, I'm not seeing anybody else wishing to speak. Louise has responded to all the points raised, so I'm going to move to the vote on this. We have three different ways of voting on this morning's agenda. This is the straightforward one where we are voting on the application before us. So can I see those in favour of the application? Nine. And those against? One. So if I made that 9 in favour and 1 against. Okay, that is accordingly approved with the conditions as set out in the report. We're sticking with South Area for the next item, but we're moving from Bourneville and Cotteridge Ward, heading outwards to Bartley Green Ward and looking at 47 Woodgate Lane, Woodgate, and members will have noted that the recommendation on this is to refuse. So when we do get to the vote, we'll be voting on that recommendation. We do have a speaker, so I will ask. Yeah, just coming to you, Louise. I know I'm easily confused, but not that easily. So we will again do update speaker, response to speakers, and then bring members in. Louise.
Thank you, Chair. Just one update, correction of paragraph 4.6. So in terms of the number of signatories to the petition, that should say 468, not 439. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sean, over to you to manage our speakers.
Thanks, Chair. We have Mr. Udin, the agent, in support, and Mr. Riemann, the applicant. I understand you're going to speak, but there's a bit of time left at the end, you're chipping. So you've got 3 minutes between you. I will remind you 15 seconds before the end so you can wind up. So whenever you like.
Good morning. I'm the agent to the applicant. Just want to give you a bit of background about the premises. It's situated, as the report says, predominantly in the residential area. However, next door we have a post office owned by the applicant. A few doors away we have a florist. To the back of the premises we have a large business park. And to the front we have some flats which are some distance away from the premises. So that sort of describes the residential aspect. Now, the premises has been laying empty for over 1 year. The applicant has accepted that if he does take the premises over, he'll change it to an A5 takeaway. Now, what that entails is a flue extraction unit to the back, which face the business park. And from that you get the noise and the smell. Now, in terms of the noise and the smell, that's been described in the report from Canopy Direct, which states that in terms of the noise, it will be within the guidelines specified in the British standards, which is 45 decibels after 11 o'clock. Now, so that satisfies the noise. In terms of the smell, there will be smell, however, it's all mitigated through the fuel extraction unit, which we've specified in the Canopy Direct report. We've got certain things in place which limits the noise, the smell coming from the system. But there will be some smell, but however, it will be limited. Now, in terms of the reason for refusal, it has stated that the shop is in a residential area. However, that shouldn't be the point of confusion because it's situated in that area. We've got over 500, near 500 people who have signed a petition to say the local people, the residents that we're talking about, they've signed a petition to say that they want something like this there for their use. The nearest off food takeaway is some distance away, which is an appeal to them. Now, the second point of the reason for refusal was the amount of people that is going to be using the new A5 use compared to the betting shop. I would say because both are classified as retail units, the footfall would be the same, if not less, because in a betting shop we'd probably have a lot of customers coming in and out on a regular basis, whereas a takeaway, it's only open between 5 and 11, and during that period we don't expect the footfall to be hugely different to what the betting shop would be achieving throughout the whole of the day. Anyway, so going back to the reason for refusal, the takeaway is close proximity and the parking issue. So in terms of the parking, we have 3 parking in front of the premises and 3 in front of the post office, which is owned by the same applicant. Now, in total, we could accommodate 6 parking spaces. So, yeah, so thank you.
In case anyone hasn't understood, when we're recommending approval, we hear the objectors, even if there isn't anyone speaking in support. And because refusal is recommended, the reverse applies. So we hear the support, even though there's nobody offering an alternative view. Louise, would you like to come back on the points raised there?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the speaker. Members can see in the photos attached to the report, this is an existing betting office next door to a convenience store post office. The surrounding area is mainly residential. There is a business premises to the rear, as mentioned by the applicant, but it is a predominantly residential area. And I think you can see in the photos the close proximity of those existing houses to where the proposed takeaway would be. Proposed opening hours of the takeaway, 7 in the morning till 11 at night, 7 days a week. Just to mention to members that we did refuse a previous application earlier in the year. Nothing has changed in terms of the proposal that was refused under delegated powers. The difference this time is that we do have a petition in support of the application, which has been mentioned by the speaker. The concerns on this application, 2 concerns. The first is in terms of the impact on the more immediate neighbours in terms of residential amenity, the noise and disturbance that will be generated from the customers, particularly later into the evening compared to the existing lawful use as a betting office. And we do think that there will be an increase in activity and disturbance to those neighbours. We also have concern over the car parking. Obviously, the applicant mentioned that there was some car parking on the forecourt of the premises, and I think members can see that. You can also see just to the right-hand side of the photo the close proximity of the pedestrian crossing. Our concern is that, like most takeaways, people like to be able to park in an easy location that they can quickly get into the takeaway and back out again. Whether they're likely to want to have to manoeuvre into and out of the forecourt, I think is questionable if there are other people parked there. So the likelihood is that they will be tempted to park close to that pedestrian crossing, and there is concern there. The site is located on a bend in the road, and there is concern about the safety on the highway and for pedestrians. Obviously, we do acknowledge that there is the petition in support, but this is a site that isn't within a local centre. It's a fairly isolated couple of commercial units surrounded mainly by other residential premises. And we are concerned about that adverse impact over and above what would happen with the existing betting shop, and therefore the application is recommended for refusal, which is in line with the decision taken earlier this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members want to come in on this one? Councillor Cornish.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have spent quite a time in this area, visiting family, so I've got a pretty good idea of the area myself. And these vacant I noticed that quite a while ago, there used to be a fish and chip shop before it became an islander, and then onto a bedding shop now. And there were residents alongside it at that point, properties I should say, which of course have been demolished now. And what we've got is a vacant shop, the florist and the post office, which I think is also a shop area. But close to that, there is a small factory, and my concern is the area at the back, which is a kind of business park really, where you are going to get noise generated from the use of that, lorries and so forth, entering frequently. So there will be noise around there for that, yes, I would agree. And obviously there's a very large housing estate. And I'm thinking with all of these, with the petitions, which are large number, I think it's 460 something. Obviously, there's an awful lot of interest in having this vacant shop utilised in the way that is being suggested. And having been a fish and chip shop before, there's no say on what it ended up being other than a takeaway. But it seems that there's quite a lot of interest there to have it installed as a usable area, such as takeaway, whether it's fish and chips or something else. And so far, my understanding is there's only really been one objection. I'm aware that our officers are recommending refusal. However, I'm finding a little bit sort of confused on this to what it has been used for, and the area at the moment around that is already producing the well, the factory side. I don't understand why we can't have takeaway there, but I do take on board what you say how close it is to the crossing, and obviously parking is very, very important to get that right. But I don't believe that it's going to be parking there all the time. So I'm actually looking towards support examination. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that this is a shop unit that needs to be brought back into use, and I'm very conscious of the fact that the applicant has demonstrated significant support from residents in the area who would actually like the unit to become a hot drink takeaway. I'm interested to hear from Councillor Cornish that it has in fact been one before. As Councillor Cornish points out, there's only been one letter of objection that's been made. It seems to me a little bit perverse that we've got the officers here sort of opposing public opinion, really. I can see that there is an issue with the crossing, because obviously the shop is on the zigzag lines from the pedestrian crossing, and I do acknowledge that can be an issue. I'm certainly aware of an instance in the road where I live, where there is a hot food takeaway and there is a pedestrian crossing, and there is parking on the zigzags. But I do feel that if we were minded to approve this application, which I think we should, then maybe we could put some condition in that the shopkeeper displays a large notice pointing out that it is illegal and ticketable to be parking on the zigzags, and that may be a way of dealing with that problem. But I see great support for this, and the fact that it's been a chip shop in the past, to me, is an indication that this is an ideal use for this for this empty unit currently. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Moore, did you indicate that you wanted to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't think I've ever come across an application for a hot food takeaway before which has had such substantial support for it. So that is unusual, and it's strange that we're being asked to refuse the application when there is such support for it, when I know before we've been asked to approve applications when there's been substantial opposition to it. So it does seem strange. And like with Councillor Ward, I mean, I appreciate, you know, this application is far from perfect and there's the parking, the noise and the smell, but presumably those can be addressed through conditions. Other takeaways have been approved before. We presumably have noise and smell issues. There are conditions on to control that. So I am slightly surprised that we're being asked to refuse this on this basis. And particularly, I mean, if it was a conventional retail unit, I would be more concerned, but it is a betting shop, which traditionally are not well received in local areas by the community because of the antisocial behaviour they attract. So I would assume the use of a hot food takeaway will be a better use of now it's an empty unit, than the betting use that's currently permitted. So is there any particular reason why conditions are not acceptable that would make this application suitable for approval?
And Councillor Stanford.
Chair, looking at the photos, it seems to me that you could pick this site up and drop it into almost any residential area within the city. I can think of plenty of post offices and hot food takeaways that have no parking whatsoever. So the fact that this application actually has the benefit of 6 parking spaces immediately outside, and the fact that there are in photos bollards surrounding the pavement in front of the shops to prevent dodgy pavement parking. I think actually the provision of parking here is more substantial to what you would typically find in commercial retail or hot food takeaway sites across the rest of the city. So I'm a little confused on that point. And the other thing to mention is that with the pedestrian crossing, again, similar to my colleague here, I live across the road from a shop with no parking, which is essentially on a pedestrian crossing, exactly like this. And if anything, I would have thought, given the close location of residential housing, I would hope that the majority of customers of this shop and, of this takeaway and the shop adjacent would be people within the local area that were within walking distance of this proposed takeaway. With that in mind, I would suggest that the pedestrian crossing is almost an asset to the application rather than a problem to it. Equally, whilst I do understand the issue of zigzag crossing, and again, it's something I see very regularly in similar situations elsewhere in the city, that to me is a question of enforcement of the law and dodgy parking. It's not something which should necessarily be taken into account for this application. So on that basis, I would agree with the comments that we've already heard and be minded to approve this application to bring this unit back into use.
I'm not seeing anyone else. I'll bring Louise. Right, okay, suddenly. Councillor Idris.
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of these proposals in the residential areas. But what I find is inconsistency from the planning. This sort of proposal in my own ward, and even the city wards, no matter how many we have on plan, in the council have plan, they get approved. And I can understand if this unit was a residential unit and working into a takeaway, I would be against it. It's a replacement of a betting shop, which has been there for a long time. And I understand these days, betting shops are open from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the evening. But looking at the area around that, I can see some merit in having facilities like this. So I found it out.
Councillor Meir?
Yes, Chair. Just wanted to know, and obviously, fast food takeaway does attract a lot of different clientele from different surrounding areas. It brings in negative impacts as well. I just wanted to know that would there be a restricted time on this application to when, till what time it will be open to? If I can just have a clarification on that, there be no restriction.
Councillor Suleiman.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of main concerns that I did, that we have is around the parking and sort of the timing, whether, it'd be interesting to know with the betting shop and the other shops that are there, what times they're open, because obviously it is, they're proposing to open it till 11 o'clock. So whether that would have obviously increased footfall after the rest of the sort of shops are closed. But I was really interested to learn that he has operated as a chip shop before. So I think one of the difficulties we have with making decisions like this is obviously if we don't have knowledge of as much knowledge of the sort of the surrounding areas as the others have. I don't know the full impact that it will have. But those were my sort of main concerns from reading the report with the parking and again the time that it's going to look at.
Okay, is that everybody? I'll bring in Louise, followed by Sean. Paul, do you have anything to add on the transportation issues? Right, we'll go Louise, Paul, and then Sean. Louise.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to members for the questions. Just in terms of the existing use at the moment, the lawful use is a betting office. Betting office is actually a sui generis use. So they couldn't go back to a takeaway, or in fact, they couldn't go to any other use without requiring planning permission. And it may well have been that it was a takeaway previously and it's evolved and changed its uses. But it does need a change of use to anything else, including the takeaway, hence why we got that planning application. Obviously, it is positive that somebody is wanting to bring a use back into a vacant unit and invest in that property and the area, and that is very positive. And clearly there is a lot of support for the takeaway, and that is something that needs to be taken into account and weighed up in the balance in terms of the material considerations. I suppose the question is, does that level of wider support outweigh the more immediate concerns that we have, the impact on those neighbours which are much closer, so the people living in the houses to the left and the right and the flats opposite? Does the general support outweigh the potential harm that might be caused to them in terms of the additional noise and disturbance that a takeaway may bring? Just in terms of conditions, if members were minded to approve the application and whether conditions could cover all of those concerns, certainly some of those issues could be dealt with. It's very common for us to deal with the details of the extraction via a condition so that we can ensure that there are no adverse impacts in terms of odour and noise that comes from that extraction. So yes, we could have a fairly standard condition on that. It's difficult when we turn to the issue of car parking and obviously putting signage up within the takeaway. Yes, that might assist, but it's not something that we could enforce. And I think it's difficult for people to control any dangerous car parking outside premises. So I think that is still something that would remain as a potential risk. It's also difficult to control that wider impact of noise and disturbance. Obviously, something we could look at is the hours of operation. The applicant was suggesting 7 in the morning till 11 at night, 7 days a week. To be honest, 11 at night is not unusual for a takeaway. In fact, it's probably fairly modest in terms of some of the applications we get. So I would suggest we probably wouldn't want to be any more restrictive about that. Whether we look at whether it should be 7 days a week is something that we could discuss further. But I think that's probably as far as we could go in terms of any suggested conditions. And it's whether you as members think that would give sufficient protection to the more immediate neighbours. Thank you. Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, from my colleague's perspective, reviewing the submission, just initially clarity. The application form refers to a number of parking spaces. The speaker refers to more parking spaces than the application form refers to, but there was no clarity of where those parking spaces were. So without that information, it's difficult to determine whether it's practical to talk about 4 or 6 parking spaces. Looking at the application form, some of those are likely to be in front of the supermarket, new edge of the site owned and stand by the same applicant. However, members are mindful to support, so there is reference to previous use of maybe the takeaway several uses ago. Perhaps it would be beneficial to understand from a survey of how that report is used today, based on the mini-market next door, and actually whether there is 4 or 6 spaces regularly available for a hot food takeaway, given the proximity of the pedestrian crossing. Looking at Street View, several versions of Street View several years ago, it's clear that bollards have changed position, and that may well be tactically to prevent overspill parking from the forecourt. Bollards are now positioned at the back of the road. That to me suggests there is a way of trying to control a historical issue where the vehicles may previously have been encroaching onto the footway. So I think, in my view, advising the police officer, we would suggest that more information is needed to look at the practicality of parking layout, and then we will ask further.
Thank you. Sean?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of issues. I can understand members being confused about the fact that normally we have a weight of objections one way and we tend to maybe support that. The hard thing for you is that this isn't a popularity vote, so it doesn't matter how many objections or support we get. What matters is what the issues are that they raise. And one good objection, raising one issue that is fundamental and makes the application unacceptable, is enough. And here, unusually, we've got hundreds of people saying, yes, we want a takeaway. And I have to say, I would probably raise my hand if somebody offered me a takeaway in nearby where I live. But as you can see from me, that's not a big surprise. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right in planning terms. And what we have here is a lot of people who live nearby saying it would be far more convenient if we had a takeaway near to us. Okay, fine. But we also have people who live very close to this premises, and it's our job to protect them if the impact of the use of that premises is unacceptable. And we do have a small number of objections saying that there are concerns. Our view as officers is that if this was a broader parade of shops and it was a takeaway in the middle of it, then its impact would probably be less. But we've just got a couple of shop units here, and it's going to have a very localised impact. And we think that the impact of unsociable hours, noise and disturbance will have an adverse impact on nearby residents. And that's why we're recommending refusal. There was a bit of, I think, confusion around the issues of odour and noise. And I think, just to explain where we're at with that, you've got the typical odour and noise that's created by the activity itself, the cooking of food, and the smell and the noise that goes along with that. That we're content that can be dealt with by equipment. And I think, as you heard from Louise, equipment would be sort of aimed at the business park. And so we think that part of the use is controllable by conditions. The bit where we are unhappy about, the bit where we don't think we can control it, is this late night activity. It's the activity, and we're all familiar with it. You've got a takeaway of whatever variety. People are turning up till 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, and there will be noise and disturbance associated with that. And we think that's the bit that's going to have the unacceptable impact. And I think that's related to the highway safety issue we're raising as well, because of the proximity of the pedestrian crossing. It's that activity that's going to increase parking on or by the pedestrian crossing. The other point I wanted to make is there's been comments made about previous uses of the site. Now, I don't know when it was a chip shop or if it was a chip shop. What I can see from the planning history is that planning permission was granted for its use as a betting shop 45 years ago. So I suspect from that it's been a betting shop for 45 years. And if it was a chip shop prior to that, then we're talking of some time ago. And I think, as someone who can remember chip shops built 45 years ago, that there has been a distinct change in the activities associated with hot food takeaways over the past 45 years. They open later, they have an increased usage, they have a wider catchment, and they're no longer the local takeaway that people walk to and get their evening meal. So I think all of those things, for me, are explaining to you why the recommendation is to refuse. It hasn't been taken lightly. It has been debated at length, but I hope that helps you to sort of understand some of those issues. Thank you.
Councillor Moore, you wanted to come back in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Paul suggested a survey of the parking area to help transportation form their view. Would it be beneficial to defer the application back to the place? From a financial perspective.
I'm not sure that helps. I mean, all that was going to tell us is how many cars can park on the frontage. I can see from Google Street View that you can get 2 or 3. You can't, if you got 4, then they wouldn't be able to get out. That for me isn't really the issue, and I think the point that was made by the agent when he was speaking is that the 2 properties are owned by the same person, and it's entirely possible that you're getting in and out across the forecourts. So we're looking at 2 or 3 parking spaces in front of the takeaway. Probably late at night when the shop's closed, people will park in front of the shop as well because they'll be able to. And I don't think whether that's 3 or 4 or 5 really matters. I think what I'm interested in from highways is whether they support the fact that this nature of use will result in additional on-street parking, and whether that would create a highway danger adjacent to the pedestrian crossing. And we don't have that opinion. And so the opinion you have of the recommendation for refusal is based on the planning officer's view from knowledge of these kind of premises, and we think that there will be an issue. So if there is a deferral, I would prefer it to be to examine reason 2 rather than simply tell me how many parking spaces there are.
But Paul did say it, and Councillor Moore has moved that we defer on that point, taking on board Sean's point that it should be the wider issue around reason 2. I think Councillor Stanford's about to second that proposal. Are you not? No. Oh, okay then. Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to pick up on the surveying of usage and parking. To do so at this point, whilst that unit is empty, wouldn't serve a particularly useful function, given that if the unit were in operation either as a gambling shop or as a fish and chip shop a long time ago, it doesn't reflect the accurate picture of how that unit has been used and how that parking has been used. And the second thing, if I may, I was just wondering about the reason for refusal being the impact on the immediate neighbours within the vicinity. I was just wondering if, I don't know if this is something officers can do, but we checked to see if the signatories of the writing in favour of the application include those neighbours, or we have specific objections from those neighbours. Because if either of those things are or aren't the case, I think we're probably putting too much weight on the immediate neighbours who could have objected to this proposal.
The answer to your question is no, we haven't checked, and we wouldn't, because our duty, our responsibility is to protect the amenities of existing and future neighbours, whether they like it or not. It's our job to protect them. And the reason why that duty falls to us is that sometimes neighbours can feel pressured into signing something that they don't really want to sign. So, and I'm not saying that's the case, because I don't know whether they've signed the petition or not. It's our job to say, is there an adverse impact on that neighbouring property, whether the current occupants think it's okay or not. and that falls to us to decide.
I've got a deferral moved but not seconded. Councillor Mear?
Yes, sorry, Chair. I mean, obviously, from the officer's point of view, the huge concern is the impact of the local residents nearby to the property and the impact that will have. In the application, the owner has applied to 11 o'clock, just before midnight. Wouldn't it be feasible to, say, add in a restricted time to, say, 10 o'clock? Because normally 10 o'clock will be a reasonable time for the business to operate, and also for the security and the disturbance of the local residents that will not have a huge impact. Could we look into that sort of frame?
Obviously, if you vote not to refuse this one, because we'll have to come back with conditions. It's unusual to go earlier than 11 o'clock because, apart from anything else, that then coincides with the licensing requirements up till 11. May well not need a license for takeaway activity. I'm still not seeing a seconder for Councillor Moore's proposal. Councillor Cornish.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have extremely experienced officers that work with us and that we all respect immensely. Going back in history and what they come across, obviously they are really on top of everything. On this occasion, it will be the first time that I'm not comfortable with that. Simply because of what we've talked about is the fact that we are presuming those that live very close are going to be very unhappy. Even if not today, they will be presuming in the future they are not going to be happy. We're overlooking the fact that the way this is set up, people are so close, there may not always be cars needed to get there. The big housing estate opposite, as well as the one directly, as we said, easy to walk. And so that's why I do feel that this is something that we should actually look. It's another premises that are vacant, that we don't like any vacant premises anymore. Hot food takeaway go very well in the area it's at, and has been in I have to say, in my youth, I don't think it was that long ago.
I was trying to be very careful how I said that.
Probably as a young child, but no, not that old. But anyway, I'm still happy, I'm sorry, that I would like to go with agreeing with this one. The other way.
I think those points have already been covered. Sorry, Councillor Moore, I think your proposal's fallen away for lack of a seconder. Are you ready to vote on this? You'll be voting on the recommendation to refuse. So if you vote for the recommendation to refuse, and there's a majority, it will be refused on the grounds set out. If you vote against the recommendation to refuse, it's the exact reverse of what we normally do. It will come back with conditions rather than reasons for refusal, because we've got those. Is everybody clear what we're doing? Okay, can I see those in favour of the recommendation to refuse this application? Well, that was easy to count. Those against the recommendation to refuse? Any abstentions? I make that 9 against. I missed it. You make it right. I've missed somebody. Can I just take that one again? Those against the recommendation to refuse. Oh, it's Councillor Azim hasn't got his hand up very high. Yep, that's 10. So that's 0 in favour of refusal, 10 against. And as I say, well, we would normally be deferring for reasons. We are deferring for conditions, and that will come back to us. Those are the 2 applications which were new to us today. We move on to returning applications, and I just wanted to say, as you've just seen, the committee is entitled to find the planning balance in a different place to where officers have found it, as long as it's based on material issues which are relevant to that particular application. We can and we do find the balance in a different place and then work through the reasoning for that. It is not a big falling out between members and officers, and we're moving on to two applications which are coming back with reasons for refusal, starting with, in the East area, 76 Admington Road. Tony, do you want to just take us through the updated report?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we have one update on this item.
Terry, speak up, please.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. We have one update on this item. Following the committee's decision to defer the application, minded to refuse, we have reconsulted West Midlands Police, the neighbourhood police team. They have responded, stating that they have read the committee report and they have restated that they have no objections to the planning application. They did point out that the HMO has been operating for between 7 and 8 years, and that they are aware of a couple of incidents at this location and have suggested that the applicant be encouraged to liaise with them. I therefore suggest that should you be minded to approve the application, that an informative be added to the decision requesting that the applicants work with West Midlands Police. In addition, I'd like to add that members will note in the report back that the main concerns expressed at the last committee related to antisocial behaviour and fly tipping. We are advised that the property has been operated for many years and that 5 of the tenants are long-term tenants. Following the consultation on the planning application, we haven't received any objections from neighbours, residents associations, West Midlands Police or regulatory services. Therefore, we consider that the application should be approved in accordance with the original recommendation and point out that it would be very difficult to defend an appeal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to come in on this one? Councillor Mear.
Chair, I have obviously spoken on the last meeting in relation to this application, where I have mentioned that antisocial behaviour, noise issues and fly tipping is a big concern to myself and the residents in that area. I think I believe most of the time when an application is gone through and people, the local residents, for them to comment on or come to planning seeking more information, sometimes the residents feel they're let down, that they think that this, by objecting or putting a comment against an application like that, I understand that it has been running for 7 years, that they would not go far enough and their voice will be never heard. This is the view that I do come across a lot in that sort of area. So I would suggest to the members to reconsider that. And as I stand, I would be voting against this application on those bases.
You're voting against the application, so you'll be voting in favour of the reasons to refuse. Councillor Ward, you called this one in. Do you have anything to add?
Only that the local councillor for the area is opposed to this application, and I support it.
Yes, Sean.
I think our difficulty here is that we don't have any evidence to support the reason for refusal, and if we were to go to appeal, we would need to present some. and without the evidence to support the fact that there has been antisocial behaviour or fly tipping that is related to this premises for the past 7 years, we would struggle really badly to defend the refusal. Hence why the report back is advising that in this case you should reconsider and admit it.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I think what my concern here is that there's been absolutely no comments at all from residents, whether it's for or against on this. So I think, you know, when you've got like absolutely zero comments from residents, it sort of, I mean, do we make an assumption that they are, you know, are we assuming that everybody's happy with it? Or given sort of the area where this HMO is based, is it that the residents are disenfranchised, or what is the reason why, or were they not consulted, you know, how was the consultation carried out? Were they informed enough? Because I'm assuming if it's been there for 7 years and residents are happy, quite easily they could have commented and the other way and said that they are happy with the proposal. And again, as I commented on the previous one, you know, it's about knowing that particular area, because each area is really different and how it will impact on that. So I think for those kind of reasons, I'm quite concerned about that there hasn't been any comments from residents living in the vicinity, considering it's been open and operating for 7 years.
I think we can draw from that after the standard consultation, nobody has commented. I don't think we can infer any other take on that other than what you see in the report. Tony, do you want to add anything?
I don't think there's much to add. In terms of the consultation process, we did consult ward councillors, residents associations, local residents. We also displayed site notices in the normal way. And as you point out, we haven't received any objections from them.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all know that there are plenty of HMOs across the city that do cause some of the issues that are highlighted in the report. But the idea that we can prejudice all HMOs with that assumption or that stereotype isn't necessarily something which we should condone. So in the report it mentions here, obviously, it's a 7-bed HMO. Of those 7, 5 have been long-term tenants. All the tenants have been there at least 6 months. This is 7 people who have made this property their home. At least one of whom has been there for 8 years. If we were to accept the refusal for this, we'd be turfing all those people out for assumptions being made about HMOs in general relating to fly tipping and social behaviour. So I have a hesitancy around HMOs, new HMOs that we don't know anything about, but with this particular application, it's an existing HMO, it's been there for 8 years, there's been no reported issues whatsoever, so I can't do anything than support the improvement of the application.
Councillor Idris.
Thanks, Chair. I understand that it's being used as an HMO for a long time, and there have been no issues. There's no assurance guarantee that these people are going to spend 1 second 8 years because when they're going to replace for 100 people. Who knows, because in the union, it's a last 12 months. There's a huge outcry for social accommodation and HMOs, and they are underutilized all the time. That's what my reservation is.
Thank you. We do have to look at the individual application that's before us, and this is an HMO application, not supported or exempt accommodation. Okay, anybody else want to say anything? Tony, anything left to reply to?
No, I don't think there is. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the only point is the point that's just been made is that if this was a new use that hadn't already been operating, we're entitled to draw assumptions based on expectations and based on others in the area. As this is an existing use and we're asking for the retention of, there is going to be an examination of, well, what's been going on for the past 7 or 8 years. And that's where we fall into problems. Because at an appeal, we have nothing from the police, from local residents or anybody else that says this property has caused problems. And that's the difficulty. So our normal reason for refusal would be this HMO is likely to result in, and we can't do that in this case. And that's the conundrum. Thank you.
Councillor Suleiman.
Thank you. Just I was going to say, if we, I mean, if we do agree, how would we add that, the recommendation of the sort of the landlord liaison with the police? What about how would that?
Our usual process is that if the officer presenting the report has suggested an additional condition, that is absorbed into the report unless members disagree. So it's in there when we get to the vote. So what I'm asking you to do is to vote on the reasons for refusal. If there is a majority in favour of refusal, the application will be refused on the reason given. If there's a majority against the reasons for refusal, because we've already got the conditions set out, the application will be approved on those conditions. So it doesn't need to come back either way. If you're ready to vote, then can I see those in favour of the reason for refusal set out in the report? That's 2. You are voting on the reasons for refusal as set out in the report. If there is a majority in favour, it will be refused on that reason. Can I see those in favour of the reasons for refusal? 4. And those against? And those abstaining? I've lost count, and it was definitely 5.
5 permitted, 4 refused, 1 abstained.
4 for the reasons for refusal, 5 against, and therefore, and 1 abstention. So the decision based on that vote is to approve the application based on the conditions set out in the original report and the report before us today. Yep. Tandit, I'm looking to you. Tandit agrees, Sean agrees, that is the decision on that one. Thank you. Told you it was going to get confusing with 3 different voting methods. Turning the page, we come to item 9, also returning to us following a decision defer-minded to refuse, and this is 35 Wilson Road, Handsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd come a bit closer to the microphone. That's okay.
That's great. Thanks, Pete. Do you want to give us the update on this one?
Right. Thank you. No updates on this item, though, just to give you a little bit of running commentary on the report back. So at the last meeting, members were minded to refuse the application on 3 grounds. Firstly, the nursery's value to the community. Secondly, the potential harm from antisocial behaviour. And thirdly, damage to community cohesion. Officers have given due consideration to those grounds for refusal, and we do, as officers, we do have some observations to make. So firstly, starting with the nursery's value to the community, the existing use of the premises is Class C under the Use Classes Order, which includes commercial, business and service uses rather than a community use. As such, the premises could actually convert to other Class E uses, such as retail or a restaurant, without requiring planning permission. It's also important to note that as a council, we do not have any policies protecting existing day nurseries. And as for a reason for refusal on these grounds, officers do not consider it's defendable and as such cannot be brought into the planning balance, and that's reflected in the officer's report in front of you. In terms of antisocial behaviour, the proposal is for a new specialist accommodation provision to provide temporary accommodation for vulnerable young women. As identified in the officer's report, there were conditions recommended restricting its use and requiring an operations and management plan, and this was considered appropriate to provide suitable safeguards. Officers remain of the view that there is little evidence to substantiate a reason for refusal on potential harm from antisocial behaviour on this development. Finally, on the issue of community cohesion, policy is very clear that a community should provide for the needs of all residents, including those that are vulnerable and require specialist accommodation. There's no evidence of an overconcentration of HMOs or specialist accommodation within 100 metres. In the officer's report, 3 HMOs were identified, but in addition, 4 potential HMOs were identified, but didn't form part of the council's official data. Taking into account the ones which weren't identified in the council's official data, it'd still be well below the 10% threshold, coming in at, I calculate 4.4%. So officers remain, again, of the view that there is little evidence to substantiate a reason for refusal on damage to community cohesions on the basis that there isn't an over-concentration of similar uses in the locality. However, members will note that if you are still minded to refuse, a reason for refusal relating to potential harm from antisocial behaviour and damage to community cohesion has been drafted for you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to comment or ask a question on this one? Councillor Suleiman.
Thank you. I'm still minded to review based on the points that we previously, but also in terms of there's no guarantee that the residents will actually be from that particular community, or that area, as we know with other similar type of properties, you have people from all around coming and living there, so there's no guarantee of that, so I'm still mindful.
Anybody else? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I supported this application when it came before us last time. I appreciate there's a lot of apprehension around shared accommodation. I share a lot of those concerns most of the time, but this is specifically for vulnerable women. And certainly throughout my time on the council, whether it's through community safety partnerships or engaging with particularly domestic abuse charities, there's always a need for more accommodation to support vulnerable women. So I appreciate, in general terms, if this was just a conventional shared accommodation, it might be different. But as it's providing accommodation for vulnerable women, I see no reason why we can support it. And so far, I've not heard any material reasons for us to be able to resist it.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. Similar to the last application that we've just considered, I think we're very easily fall into the trap of stereotyping these types of applications, and indeed the people that are within them. Coming back to Councillor Suleiman's point about people that are going to be housed in this accommodation, if it is approved, not being within the area, from my understanding, fairly limited as it is of women's refuges of this type. Various reasons housing those women in their own communities where they were potentially at risk is the very reason that these refuges exist, and why it's not safe to house those women within their local communities. If members of this committee are happy with the drafted text on the refusal, which I think mentions antisocial behaviour, and to agree with some of the objections based on fly tipping and community cohesion, when we're talking about providing a refuge for vulnerable women in our cities, then that can sit on their own moral compass, but it's not something that I would be able to support.
Okay, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not convinced that this is a refusal last time. but no assurance on it. Because the negative impact that it has on the local community, antisocial behavior, increasing crime, litter, and strangers coming from nowhere, day in, day out, 24 hours. When the local residents challenge them, they get intimidated, and sometimes they refuse that they could be assaulted. So I'm not convinced that we'll address the local concerns that the local neighbours are going to face.
Those are the reasons that are set out in the report. Councillor Azim.
That 297 residents are against this one. And the local councillor, he has to be such cases day by day, and he is not in favor of that. And I think police was not very happy on this one. That's why there is condition for CCTV, and I'm not in favor of that. So that should be.
Sean, and do you want to pick up the point about mitigation of objections from the police?
Just to clarify, the police raised some concerns about the operation and management of the use, but did not object to it. And they recommended conditions that would enable it to be operated and managed safely and in accordance with their guidelines. You'll see we have attached or proposed to attach conditions. One of those conditions restricts the use. So it says that it can only be used to house a maximum of 9 vulnerable young women. And the second condition requires that an operation and management plan, as required or requested by the police, would be attached, will be required as well. So there are conditions in place there. There are other conditions around noise and what have you, but there are conditions in place that we think satisfactorily will manage this use. And I think the important thing here is that we do look at what is this use. It isn't, as already been said, it isn't a general HMO, it isn't a general shared accommodation. It's for a specific need to house vulnerable young women. And if you look at those kind of properties, they tend to be well managed and well protected because of the nature of what they're trying to do. And they are generally housing people from outside the area, because often, if they were housed within the area where these women are suffering abuse or other kind of harm, then you're not taken far enough. So yes, it probably will be people from wider afield. Coming back to the two issues, we've said that we've looked at the 3 issues you've raised. We've discounted the one, and we've said that the 2 that we're left with, we don't really have any evidence. So looking at those 2 issues, if we go for a reasonable refusal based on community cohesion, our policy set out a test, and that test is around the percentage of other types of accommodation in the area, the 10% test. And what you've heard is that even if we take into account all of the ones that have anecdotally been mentioned by the local councillor, we are still less than 5%, it's 4%, 4.7%. So if we were to go to appeal based on the issue around community cohesion, we would really struggle because we don't have the evidence. And in terms of antisocial behaviour, this comes back to a topic we discussed many times, which is around the kind of nature of that HMO shared accommodation can cause. Here we have a specific use and we have a specific management scheme in place to deal with that use. And I think that our view is that in this particular case, it's such that we would not be able to substantiate that reason for refusal at appeal. Hence why we're recommending permission and that you do not refuse it today. Thank you.
Councillor Suleiman.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'd just like to come back and say that, in terms of, what the proposal, the way I read it is that it's saying that it's 2 houses, what it doesn't say that it's a state house. victims escape from domestic violence, which is what the assumption is being made in now. Vulnerability can include a lot of things. I mean, you can have mental vulnerability people who have brain drug or alcohol issues. So we're making assumptions on what type of young women will be housed in here. And I fully support, and I'm sympathetic, with victims of domestic violence and young women having safe houses. But in terms of this, there isn't, it's not specification as to who will, be residing there, which is where I had my concerns. And I think, what we need to consider is that, if you have victims of domestic violence or vulnerable women, then it's not just about putting them anywhere just for the sake of it. It has, you have to look and take consideration of the sort of area and what sort of lives they will have in that area if they are, escaping, difficult situations. What sort of support that they will have. So I think that's kind of where my concern was coming from. Not the fact of obviously that covered in the report. Noted.
Councillor Mear.
Yeah, I totally agree with what someone has said. We are looking at vulnerable women, and the location has to be specific because they can easily be targeted. So the location is very important, and I believe that the location the application that has been put forward to us is not a suitable location to house these young vulnerable women. So I clearly stand on my ground on refusal based on that. Thank you, Chair.
Pete, do you want to come back on those points before we move to the vote?
Probably just on that last point, it's probably worth emphasising what's in paragraph 1.7 of the officer report. So the applicant is talking about the prospective occupant group would be young women 18 to 24 years old in transition to adulthood with no dependent children and not subject to immigration control. There would be reference checks as well as assessment interviews. Priority, this is probably an important point to make, priority will be given to women at risk of rough sleeping in accommodation where they are at risk of harm, black and minority ethnic background, and have local connections to North Birmingham. So there may be lots of circumstances why people will be in need of this accommodation. Also, the rooms will be for single occupancy only. In terms of antisocial behaviour, Sean has highlighted the police's comments. It's probably worthwhile just reiterating that the assumed behaviour of potential tenants is not a matter for planning authorities to consider, and the planning system cannot make the judgment that occupiers of this property are any more likely to be involved in antisocial behaviour than any other type of housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pete. I'll move to the vote then. As with the previous item, you are voting on the reasons for refusal. A majority in favour of the reasons for refusal will result in the application being refused on those reasons. As we already have the conditions, a majority against the reasons for refusal will result in the application being approved with those conditions. Can I see those in favour of the reasons for refusal? Those against? That's 5 each way. You've done it to me again. Right. Based on the conditions set out in the original report and the returning report today, I am going to vote against the reasons for refusal because I don't think they are defensible and therefore in favour of approving the application with those conditions, including the informative. That is my decision, which you have given to me by virtue of tying. So it is therefore approved. We've already taken item 10, the Civico report. Any other urgent business that won't wait till next time? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise, following the Erdington Ward forum that we had on Monday, where we discussed the Knox Brixworth site, which committee may remember it erroneously granted approval for. It's a remediated site with contaminated land, what I'm concerned about, because I'm worried that the council is not providing sufficient resource to ensure that the conditions attached to that application are being followed correctly. There's lots of concerns given the pollution and the contamination of the land that it's not being fully addressed, and there are concerns of the implications of that if it's not being ensuring that the conditions are not being adhered to correctly. There's meant to be lots of testing to ensure that any of the contaminations is not getting into the air and water supply. So I just wanted to share those concerns, and I do hope that we are making sure that, given the seriousness of what could happen if we don't ensure those conditions are followed, that, I know James, is it back? He's still there. So I'm hoping he can provide some reassurance that this council is ensuring that adequate resources is being provided to make sure the concerns that residents have raised around the remediation is being fully addressed.
James, can we pass that to you in your enforcement role?
Yeah, I'll pick that up with you after Councillor Moore, but like every case which is brought to our attention, we'll thoroughly investigate it to satisfy their conditions.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, final item then is the authority to the chair and officers in an urgent situation between meetings to act on behalf of the committee. I like to hear more than one voice at this point. Thank you very much. That is it for this morning, afternoon. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.